of these actors, basically, and point out the contradictions in their actions. So with that, I'll just briefly, introduce or talk about like how I think we can talk about this this theme about sustainability as to how it can be achieved within the framework of a world order that perpetuates unequal distribution of resources and perpetuates systems of exploitation and domination. How do colonial legacies and ongoing no-colonial practices contribute to environmental injustices and hinder efforts to address climate change and biodiversity loss? In what ways does modernity, with its emphasis on industrialization and consumerism, fundamentally clash with the principles of sustainability and ecological balance? So these are the broader questions, I think, which we need to discuss. And to start this conversation, I'll request you first to talk about as to how this world order, which projects itself as something which was a rule-based order to protect human rights, to project a world where everyone would have rights, with the framing of Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, and how this world order, which was very imperial in its very nature, is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, especially when we talk about in terms of what's happening in Gaza. Yes.
Thank you, Ali, for the introduction, and thank you all for coming, and to Karachi Literature Festival for inviting me here. I think what's happening at the moment in terms of the world order is exceptional. In terms of the legal structures which have been developed, and I agree with you that a lot of them were flawed in their original construction in terms of being based on sort of colonialist principles within the framework of international law. I was really critical of this when I did my law masters. This was the main thing that I was attacking. But with the passing of time and the increasing militarization and empowerment of particularly like the arms industry, you feel like in a way the law is the only thing which might be able to act as a kind of bulwark or a stabilizer or a pushback against not just states, it's beyond states now. I think it's also these multinational conglomerations, whether they take the form of something like Meta, dictating the information we can circulate and how they censor it. And they censor people like Mohammed al-Kurd and Palestinian activists all the time. And they're thinking of introducing new censorship just a couple of days ago, where they're going to block the word Zionist. Anything with the word Zionist is going to start triggering the algorithms to close down on your content. This is, before there were words like Shaheed, or Jihad, or Al-Aqsa, which were these problematic algorithms. Now they're adding to it. So you've got these big companies like Meta. You also have the arms trade, which is so phenomenally powerful in terms of the way that it influences states, not just in the, what you might refer to rather sloppily as the global north or the global south, but they have such power that they have their own sort of profit motive which is driving their actions, which is not ideological necessarily, not necessarily aligned to a state. It's just about the selling of their products. So to rein these things in, you really need a system somehow that is above it, that gets the kind of consensus, that is able to regulate on one level. So regulation of companies, which sounds very boring and bureaucratic, if this is done effectively, it can free up space for freedom of expression, for example, on Meta and other things. And it could also rein in the abilities of these arms companies. So regulation is one potential solution. The other thing is international criminal law, which is a newer form of international law that could be used, if used effectively and used with sympathetic states that have the judicial ability to arrest international war criminals when they travel. That is another way of making people who are complicit in something like the genocide that we're seeing to arrest them when they travel and to make them think twice about making these decisions that they're making while they're in war cabinets or otherwise.
Professor Naqvi, before we turn to the ecological aspects of this order, I mean, I just wanted to point out the liberal pretense and the universality of that order. Do you think that now, in this moment, it stands exposed and that it's finally collapsing, that pretense, the liberal pretense and the universality of that liberal order?
Well, first of all, thank you, whoever was responsible for inviting me on this panel. Was it you? Huh?
It wasn't me.
I don't know who put the panel together, but whoever it was, I'd like to thank them for organizing this panel and inviting me to it. The question of universalism is quite complicated, and it's complicated because in this modern period, the people who call themselves white, because it was a new kind of ideology in the world, racial ideology, is modern. These previous empires were not racial. They were dynastic empires. It's during the period of absolutism, where you have all of these figures like, starting with Isabella the Great. This is, of course, a later construction, but this is how, during the Enlightenment, Europeans came to understand their own history, constructed their own history. This was an important part. Of course, there's the construction of antiquity, but there's also the construction of their own modernity. So, key figures in that construction are these absolutist monarchs, starting with Isabella the Great, Elizabeth the Great. Then you have a whole bunch of others, Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, Louis the Great, very, very importantly, Louis XIV. Why are they all great? You know why they are all great is because, as Louis XIV, Louis XIV said, I am France. These are the people who constructed European nations. And this was precisely the period in which colonialism was happening. Speaking of this world order, this new world order that was created, that you were just talking about, the legal order. It was after Europeans had fought over the course of it's a 30-year war. Starts in 1914 and ends in 1945. You should take it all as one unbelievable period, really. I mean, the genocidal wars, which they had, of course, been fighting all over the world, which they've then fought in Europe. So Richard Overy, the best book right now, the best book on the Second World War, is Richard Overy's book Blood and Ruins, which argues, in fact, that World War II, like we already knew this about World War I, that World War II was very much, in any case, a genocidal war. So this universalism, so-called, I mean, universalism is not an invention of modernity. You're telling me, the Buddha was not universalist? For example, I mean, you could just go on and on. I mean, it's just it's part of this extremely narcissistic, a new form of narcissism in the world, historical narcissism, that we are the best people who have ever lived. What does it take to think such things? How can you think that you are the best people who have ever existed in the world? This is part of modern identity, to think that we are, and we are in fact the worst people who have ever existed in the history of the world. Because we are actually now, speaking of the Anthropocene, we have now put the future of all species, why just humans? Don't these other species have a right to exist? Just wiping them out every single day. It's an apocalypse that is happening. So in my own lifetime in this city, virtually most of the insect population, the bird population that I was familiar with in my childhood has disappeared. Nobody cares. It's as if nothing happened. This is nothing short of an apocalypse. And people think that we will not do anything, we will not fundamentally change our form of life, This is what sustainability is all about. Yeah, sustainability is a completely insidious term. Sustain what? This shit? We are going to sustain this? What are we going to sustain? Yeah. So the critique of development school, which is where I come from, yeah, as an anthropologist, post-development. Yeah. And really in our region, the figure, and I identify myself as one of his followers, Gandhi. Yeah. Gandhi was post-development, critique of development, amol left, well before these terms came into existence. Yeah. He is the foundation. Even today, this is why the fascists who are in power in India today are the very people who murdered Gandhi, and he is still amongst them the most hated figure. Yeah? Because it stands against this entire fascist global order that is coming into existence, yeah, and of which what is happening in Palestine is an absolutely insane, brutal example. We are all sitting all over the world watching this genocide. They actually told them to go to a place where they said that this is a safe place for you, and then they started butchering them there. I mean, what does it take? Yeah? And then the whole world is sitting there watching, because we have completely, thanks to this progress, ideology, yeah, okay, well, as the Americans like to say, if you're going to make an omelette, you got to break some eggs. Yeah? This is essential to modernity. If you're going to make an omelette, you got to break some eggs. Well, that egg is the entire planet now. Yeah? And I mean, it's a white supremacist, this progress, modernity, this supposedly we're supposed to sustain this. Yeah? Progress, modernity is an entirely white supremacist idea. It's totally white supremacist, yeah, techno-fetishist, nihilist, genocidal, ecocidal. Yeah, क्या कहे आदमी इसके बारे में? Huh? It's the completely destructive. We are hurtling towards extinction now. This is what is happening.
Yes, I agree with every single word you have said, and you've spoken so eloquently, and thank you for articulating it so forcefully and philosophically as well. I mean, so I think there are two aspects to this sustainability and the world order debate, which is, one is political, the other is economic. Both are linked. But again, so coming back to the political order, keeping it together, again, the rule-based order, which has been in operation since the Second World War, or even earlier than that, this so-called making of the free world. And so, I mean, I'm still interested in maybe it is cracking. Maybe the fact there is a possibility of global South solidarities. We've seen what South Africa has done. We've seen how some South American states have responded to what's happening. So, and then the way Gen Z has stormed the social media and spoken in favor of Palestine. So, do you think these are some indications of the cracking of this imperial political order, and that the possibility of a new one emerging from its hubris?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to be as optimistic as possible. So, a lot of hope was put into the incredible legal case presented by South Africa and by that team. It used a convention which thankfully has not had to be resorted to for a very long time, the Genocide Convention. It's got 153 member states, and if you sign that convention, it is not just that you are not meant to commit the act of genocide, you also have an active obligation to prevent acts of genocide. So all countries who have signed that member state, and Pakistan, most Arab countries have signed that member state, that convention, you are meant to intervene, and you can resort to the court for emergency measures. So that is what happened in early January. And when I was talking to lawyers involved with it at the time, they were quite worried about where the politics of the judges would go. They thought 6 would be for, 6 against, and 3 who were sort of swinging in the balance. In fact, we ended up with 15-2, almost unanimous verdicts on everything, on all of these, on all of the provisions that they asked for. There was a little bit of disappointment because people felt, why didn't they ask for a ceasefire explicitly? But as most legal analysts have concluded, that the actions that they were asking for, if you accumulated them, it would not be possible to carry them out without a ceasefire. You could not have the humanitarian aid coming in. You could not have the preservation of signs of international crimes being committed, which was one very rare and specific order that the court asked for. Okay, and then you can talk from that as a sort of positive step by the South Africans, by the Global South, and now you have the political backlash, which is huge. They knew that for this to be implemented, you need the Security Council. The trouble is, with the Security Council, you've got the Americans and the British on it. So that's going to block any action. And then you have the individual threats. There are apparently been, threats of assassination taken against the South Africans involved in this. It's like a deplorable state of being where every sort of stand, every expression of compassion, state compassion, one state or one group of people for what is, what we are witnessing at the moment, which is just so deplorable, and we're all seeing it on our phones, 24/7, that when people stand up to act in compassion to that, the response of those states, which do have this mask of human rights and humanitarianism, is basically a response of standing by when you're getting violence being taken, this violence being taken against those who stand up to protect, which is what's happening in terms of, the South Africans involved in the case. And the other thing that happened, which was absolutely disgusting, was the cutting of funds to UNRWA, the United Nations Worker Relief Agency, that is trying to provide aid to Gaza. You have trucks queuing up, deep, like rows of these trucks, which are being turned back, which contain nothing more than nappies and, pasta and etc. And a lot of them are being destroyed. Some of them are being shot at. British doctors are being targeted, even though the coordinates of where those doctors are located in Gaza has been given from the British government to the Israeli government. This is an incredibly psychopathic, contemptible, a leadership going on in Israel, which is so full of contempt for every other country, and so unreined in, that I was thankful for the ICJ, for the International Court of Justice, for trying, but it also needs a lot of political support to get it to be effective, and that's, sadly, it's lacking at the moment.
So a follow-up question, Dr. Dabbagh, which is about, then the way the Western societies and the governments have tried to control, critical discourse around Palestine and, settler Zionism, and the way, they have disinvited scholars, curbing Palestinian voices, the way, the American Senate is trying to control colleges and their, campuses. So what does it mean, do you think? Like, what is it? What are the implications of that on the future of democracy within Europe? I mean, we're already seeing the emergence of very right-wing organizations in Holland, in Germany, across the continent. Britain itself. So.
I think it's really interesting. I think the way that Israel-backed groups, which are powerful and well organized, are pushing for legislation which closes down on civil liberties and civil freedoms in places like the UK, which is a place I know best, is going to affect everybody across the board. I always say that if the law is good enough to protect Palestinians, it's good enough to protect anyone. There is legislation which has been introduced at the moment which is going to close down on the ability to boycott, to divest, to sanction, to make decisions on an ethical basis. So even concerning the environment, it's all going to be curtailed, and it's partly coming from a desire to close down the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, which is a non-violent movement inspired by people like Gandhi, for example. I mean, it really is. It's just, that is what our civil society is calling for, for where individuals have power to do so, to divest from investment in companies that support the Israeli apartheid system. So one is boycott, sanctions. You see attacks on academics, Middle East studies departments, literature departments, post-colonial studies departments. People are being dismissed from their job, they're being curtailed, they're being smeared. You see it also with, with the IRH, the definition of anti-Semitism, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, which in its examples directly conflates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. So once you've done that, and you've got legislation already on the books saying that anti-Semitism is an offense, you basically close down on all Palestinian scholarship. I mean, I've just got a PhD. Probably if this IRHR definition is introduced more, I would never have been able to have got that. I would not have been able to study the things that I studied. Those are some of the ways. And then also, like in Germany, you see the withdrawing of prizes, you see the disinviting of people, often in a really humiliating way. Like they offer the prize to a great British playwright like Carol Churchill, then they say, oh no, actually we've just found out that you support BDS, so we're not going to give you that prize. So then she ends up with this, not just not the prize, which is one thing, but also the smear of anti-Semitism, which will follow her around. And sometimes these restrictions, the way that they work on individual artists, is very, it's the chill factor, which you can't really, you don't know whether, a literary festival or a publisher has actually, they don't have to be prohibited. They can just feel, this might be a little bit too uncomfortable for me. So then you start closing down in a different way. It's a sort of, so those are some of the examples I would
so,
say.
Hasnain Naqvi, then, so we've talked about the political order and its and how it's changing. And you talked already about, the unsustainability of the economic aspect, but, it basically, it equates with being in the world, modernity as being in the world, and we in that modernity, in its full philosophical range, is then incompatible with human life as we know it. But then
with life as such.
Life as such. So
it's
is there
actually driven by a death instinct? Yeah, I mean, it's genocidal and suicidal. Now it is clear that we are on a suicidal path. This progress, business, and development, which was the basis of the civilizing mission, obviously, which was a completely new kind of justification of empire. Now, all of that is completely implicit in these ideas. And it's clear that it's suicide. Obviously, I was talking about this new form of narcissism, historical narcissism. You think that you are better than the entire history of humanity. You're the best people that have ever existed. This historical narcissism, any kind of narcissism is ultimately self-destructive. That's why all the civilizations of the past, which actually deserve to be called civilizations rather than this one, they basically cultivated in the individual ascesis, that's the word that we were using. Narcissism was the worst thing, it was the root of all evil. That's what everybody used to think. So even until Shakespeare, for example, in Julius Caesar, he says, why Brutus, when he is justifying his assassination of Caesar, he says he killed him because Caesar was ambitious. So ambitious was such a big gali, it was a swear word, it was so derogatory, yeah, that he was actually justifying his assassination of him to the Roman people. And then Mark Antony, of course, makes fun of it, mocks it by saying, reminds them that, you know, Caesar was generous, in fact, to them, yeah, and yet Brutus says he was ambitious. Ambition was thought to be, by everyone, selfish, and therefore not just destructive of other people, yeah, uncaring and selfish, but also ultimately of the self. भाई कुरान के अंदर भी आप अपने ऊपर खुदा को सबसे ज़्यादा जो शिकायत है इंसान से वो क्या है कि हम अपने नफ्स पर जुल्म करते हैं। आप अपने नफ्स पर जुल्म किस तरह करते हैं? खुदगर्जी के जरिए, बाय कॉन्स्टेंटली प्रोवोकिंग योर नफ्स। तो ये तो पूरा निजाम ही इन्होंने बनाया है, कॉन्स्टेंटली गोइंग ऑन एंड ऑन अबाउट हाउ ग्रेट ह्यूमन बीइंग्स आर, बिकॉज यू रिप्लेस खुदा विथ खुदी। इट हैपेंड ऑल्सो ना, खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर। दिस इज टोटली मॉडर्निस्ट। हमारे पूरी रिवायत में खुदी को बुरी चीज समझा गया, इन मौसूफ ने आके खुदी को खुदा की जगह खुदी लगा दी। जरूरी था ना तरक्की के लिए।
लेकिन
नहीं, आप नहीं बोल सकते, फिलहाल मैं बोल रहा हूँ। यहाँ पैनल पे
I need a bit of a translation.
No, he's asking me. Yeah. So this narcissism.
she would need some translation for what you're saying. So
oh, I see.
Yeah. Sorry,
So, it's okay. I'm talking about what I was talking to you about earlier also.
Yeah, okay.
This new kind of hyper-masculinity that was developed, and Iqbal, who is the national poet of this country, contributed to this hyper-masculinization of our culture. Yeah, you need to be narcissistic in order to make progress. Yeah, because it's a part of the whole thing.
This is one thing.
But I just want to say something about the international order that we were talking about. What is happening in Palestine right now, to my mind, shows that in fact the world order that they created, the UN, etc., that they created after World War II, was in fact no different from the Westphalian order. The Westphalian order provided for no law between states. They call it an order. It's the height of lawlessness, which enabled this unprecedented period of lawlessness for centuries, from the 15th century, but especially after this supposedly secular order that was created. In fact, it was totally evangelical. Even the colonial state here was totally evangelical. That's one of the reasons that the rebellion happened in 1857. So in fact, this world order, what we are witnessing, nationalism has destroyed all societies all over the planet because it is a form of collective narcissism. It goes together with historical narcissism, which is progress. Nationalism is nothing but collective narcissism. And it has destroyed cultures all over the world. We cannot continue in a nation-state order. Whatever order we need, evolving, and exactly so I am quite pessimistic. Exactly the opposite is happening, because what is happening is that new imperial powers, world powers, like Russia, I mean the BRICS countries, South Africa has redeemed itself a little, by what it has recently done. But otherwise, look at the BRICS countries: Brazil, India, China, which is also a genocidal state, genocidal imperial state. Of course, as Partho Chatterjee has shown, imperialism and nationalism are completely intertwined, because the national order was the national imperial order that the Goras created, during the people who called themselves Goras. We didn't call them Goras. Ye acha hai. First you say, I am Gora, you are Kala. And then when you say Gora, then you say, थप्पड़ मारते हैं कि हमको गोरा क्यों कह रहा? अरे भाई, जो आप अपने आप को कह रहे हैं वो हम नहीं कहेंगे तो और क्या कहेंगे आपको?
Okay, but there is, okay, so for, I think people would like to also, you know, maybe they will ask that, is there any other way of being in this world? Because we are so accustomed to the idea of, enamored by the idea of modernity and development. So what is the, so...
Human beings have been around for over 300,000 years. Literally all the nation states that exist in the world, almost all of them, first of all, most of them came into existence in the 20th century. The rest of them came into existence in the 19th century, and you'll find a few that came into existence after the Westphalian order. Yeah, I mean that's the whole business of the absolutist state, is creating national societies, national polities, a national state. Initially it was obviously the despot, the absolutist monarch, and then it became the nation state. In fact, there were so many continuities between them, and for the rest of the world, the creation of national states in Europe was hardly a boon. Throughout the 19th century, there's genocide all over the planet. This is how this world came into existence. This is how the world in which we are, it was a pretty bad film. I watched this film yesterday, Donkey, which is this new Shah Rukh film. So, uske andar wo kya, the rest of the film is pretty, it's rubbish, but there was this one nice speech that this refugee, this immigrant to England out of desperation in post-colonial India. So it's a very schizophrenic film. Hardcore nationalism on the one hand, and this Gora worship on the other. The two go together. In fact, these nationalists are envious of the Goras. Gora societies are a catastrophe. They know too much and too little about white people and white societies. She said, in that this girl makes a good speech in the film, she said, first they destroyed our societies, that's why we come here to begin with. This is what they did in the past couple of centuries. This is why people are fleeing from all over the world, because they destroyed most of the planet.
I'd just like to ask, in terms of like what you're saying, a lot of it is I'm really persuaded by. I have a little bit of a problem with this Gora and being white and all that.
They call themselves Gora.
Anyway, but if apart from that, like the next step, like what would you? Would you want like? Are you anti-borders? Would that be like a first step?
Absolutely.
And is it like Samir Amin's delinking? Is that the kind of de-development model that
Marxists also are totally enamored. Samir Amin, of course, is a great Marxist from our time period. Marxists are also completely enamored of this progress. They have utter contempt for people who they think are primitive. They belong to some other time period. What does it mean for people to think that some people who live in our time period belong to some other time period? It's a completely genocidal way of looking at human beings. That by rights they shouldn't be here. People living in forests, people living on the land, rural people have contempt for them. People who live in, and this is one of the reasons that they hate the Palestinians also. Why are Palestinians, these are the, some of the most peaceful people in the world. They have no ecological impact. Why are they so despised? And not just by the Israelis, by the Arabs. Why are they so despised? Because they are a rural people. They live simple lives.
So one last question before we, invite our audience to raise questions. So, it is a catastrophe. But if there is any hope, and for that hope to exist, like how do people come together? How do social movements for environmental justice? Is there a possibility in the first place for that kind of an effective resistance against this imperial order and the economic destruction that it has caused? Is it possible for indigenous groups, communities to come together to forge a powerful sort of like resistance for environmental justice and social rights. What do you think?
I mean, I tend to think of just like if each person can do as much as they can within their means and ability, that's a starting point. So, I mean, on Palestine we have, I think that the shift to the younger generations in terms of sympathy and support is an important one. I think they're better informed. I think they avoid the mainstream media. I think they're very, yeah, and I think that's a source of hope. They're very savvy. They can see cut through the bullshit, basically. But there are also some groups which are engaged in direct action in the UK. Palestine Action, they go out in trucks, in like buses at dawn to arms factories where they basically use graffiti. A lot of them get graffiti, or they enter into the premises to just disrupt some of these companies, the key companies where they can show linkage to what's going on in Israel. And we have had legal challenges in the UK with regards to the exportation of arms at the moment, and they're quite, quite tricky to put together. But I think that sometimes it has stalled things, and if you can coordinate that with advocacy campaigns and putting pressure on one particular legal avenue, and you can shift the narrative and you can stall things. I mean, none of these are like a silver bullet, but it's a lot of different actions which are growing up organically with loose coordination systems can often be better than one great overarching plan. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gee, we have about 10-15 minutes for questions. Gee, mic on. इस second row में जो है उनको दे.
Hello everyone, this is Aga Aurangzeb. My question is, like we always criticize West for their flaws and overall things. The basic thing is why we not promote indigenous modernity, in sense like if we do not identify the toxic elements in our cultures and our everything, so someone else will do. And if we do not just look at the things with our own indigenous scholarship, someone else would do this. And when they will do this, they of course will justify the things with their own perspective, their own sense of morality and norms. So this was my question. Thank you.
There was उनके पीछे भी I think किसी ने हाथ खड़ा किया तो उनसे भी जी वो हाथ उनसे ले.
Good morning. I would like to emphasize what this gentleman was really putting up to. I do agree when Dr. Salma spoke about we need more regulations, we need more criminal laws. But the question is who's going to do it? So I totally agree with Dr. Nauman when he said, we know that this supremacy doctrine has been in place and it's still in place. But the thing is that we are still trying to fix that model, staying in the model and still looking up to the same people to come up with a solution. Why aren't we really discussing about alternate models? Why can't we just put them aside and start working on our own, looking for good and better alternatives? I see all of these, they are not doing this, they are not doing it. Whatever you do, accept it and come to terms. They are not going to sit with you on equal terms with the table. It's high time you should accept it. So,
yeah.
What do you think? Should you remain in the system, still work for it, or should we really be working on alternatives?
So, Dr. Dabbagh, you go first.
I mean, I guess you can hear from between the two of us, I'm probably more... Sorry, is it on?
It's on.
It's on? Oh, okay. I think perhaps I'm really rethinking things actually from this conversation. I mean, I tend to work with existing models. That's my, it's my training. I live in London. I've got a legal background. I'm very embedded to modernity. I'm half white. I guess that also affects me. It's just been where I put my efforts. And I guess that's where I am. I can see that it's a really dysfunctional model. I just keep thinking that maybe you don't throw out like the baby with the bathwater. You don't like say the whole thing is useless. You try to find ways of making it more effective. But I can see the need for a new model. I think maybe if you speak to that point.
Well, that's the reason to answer this young gentleman's question also, that I started by saying that I am a Gandhian. We do have an alternative model, yeah, and they were both Muslim and Hindu Gandhians. The most famous example, of course, this gem of a man, really a saint, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was in this, what the region that today is Pakistan, the greatest leader, yeah, that this region produced, yeah, without a doubt, yeah, and he was a Gandhian, yeah. What human beings need to do, yeah, is very dramatically reorient themselves to living very simple lives. In fact, most people who are living on this earth will not need to do that because they are already living very simple lives. It is people like us really and people above us who are still a minority on this planet, who need to reorient themselves, yeah, and value something more than all this tishanbazi. Yeah, there should be something more to life than status and being able to dominate others. Yeah, apart from one's narcissistic pleasures, there must be something more to life. Yeah, and that can only happen if you live a simple life. That's something more. Yeah, all of this. So one of the courses that I teach at Habib University, which is part of the Liberal Core program, is called Hikmah. Khairun Kasiran, Quran calls it, which is wisdom. Who talks about wisdom these days? Wisdom is an archaic concept. This is not something that people say, oh, you know, very wise. My friend is, they'll say, my friend is really, really smart. Smartness, chalaki. Yeah, this is what is valued. And what is valued is कि खूब टिशन हो आदमी के. Yeah, कि बड़ी सी आपकी गाड़ी है, शानदार सी, बड़ा सा बंगला है. This is what life is all about. Those people are living wrecked lives. Yeah, I mean, in America itself has the highest per capita consumption of all kinds of psychiatric drugs, starting with antidepressants, of course. Everybody now knows about the opiate crisis that happens. Millions of people who are homeless, millions of people. This is the wealthiest society that has ever existed. Millions of people who are in prison. Yeah, it's a complete catastrophe. The United States of America and other European countries are not only a crisis for humanity, in fact, a crisis for this earth. They are a crisis for them. They are a catastrophe for themselves. Just the figures of loneliness in Britain. Yeah, I was just reading the other day. It's a killer disease. Yeah, over here, thankfully, and for most people. In fact, it's people because the upper classes, they want to retreat more and more into the nuclear family. Most people don't exist in that. This is the ideal that the Goras have given us, nuclear family. Yeah. In fact, that's not how people can't survive like that. Most people don't live in this narcissistic little world of their own, like the middle classes.
Yeah.
Solipsistic, narcissistic, nihilistic.
Yes, please go ahead.
Professor Naqvi, I'm a lawyer by profession. And let me assure you that I'm open to persuasion. But let me play devil's advocate here. Given the fact that this Eurocentric model, I mean, the West is dominating our lives. I mean, they are spearheading this technological revolution. And we depend on them, you know, in our modern lives. And as you said earlier, that you come from post-development school, and most of us know. Don't you think that the prescription that your school of thought offers us is idealistic, ambitious, unrealistic? I mean, through assemblage of local cultures and post-colonial, you know, societies, we can find an alternative solution or alternative way of progress. So don't you think that it's too idealistic? I mean, the solution or the theory, you know, propounded by your school of thought, sir.
So, you know, one of the things that I do in my teaching when somebody asks a question like that, I ask them, जरा मुझे बताइए idealism को उर्दू में क्या कहते हैं? ये रोमानियत पसंदी कभी कोई मुस्तामिल है ये लफ्ज?
Romanticism नहीं, रोमानियत, that's romanticism.
मतलब romanticism के लिए भी आपने कोई लफ्ज इजाद किया ना? These are these modern terms that have been handed to you by Goras. Yeah. So subjectivity, objectivity, 1803, idealism, materialism, these terms, all of them have come into existence in the late 18th and especially in the early 19th century. There are these words only serve to confuse you and alienate you from your own experience. What does it mean, idealism? The material and the ideal are intimately related to each other in human life, and not just in human life. Traditionally, the active intellect, al-aql al-fa'al, is operative in the entire cosmos. Yeah? So you think of nature as being dead. Yeah? In fact, it's full of ideality. Everything that exists, matter exists in some form. Yeah? That form, of course, is not reducible to matter or to materiality. Therefore, this whole conceptualization of idealism and materialism as if they are some mutually exclusive categories, they're not. Yeah, they only serve to confuse you. And, you know, Rasulullah ne kaha, this is a hadith, he says, if the hour arrives, if you are planting a tree, and the hour, sa'a, yani qayamat ki ghadi, if it arrives, you should continue planting that tree. Yeah? You shouldn't say, you shouldn't run away. Yeah? So this is what we need to do. Yeah? Simple things like that. We need to return to a much simpler form of life. It's, yes, of course, the West, it's not just the West. What I said was continuously also self-critical, because I'm continuously in everything that I have said, I am constantly criticizing nationalism also. Nationalism is supposed to be us, right? So I'm not just blaming the West, I'm also simultaneously, because Gora is not just outside of you, Gora is inside of you.
Can I just say...
Sure, please go ahead.
No, I just, in terms of nationalisms, my way of seeing things has always been that you have like, that in terms of Palestine, that you have this contagion of European nationalism, that it sort of started out up late 19th century in terms of its most militarized form, and it spread and it led to the Holocaust because there was a rejection of people because of their ethnicity, because they were considered not to be racially pure. There was this idea of going back to the blood rather than the kind of multitude of different experiences that it makes to take a human living in a particular place. And we're all so mixed up now. We're all coming from different areas, and you know, there is a kind of composite of different cultures and civilizations in all of us at some level. If you go deep enough, we're all very mixed. But this type of ethno-nationalism was saying, no, we want a certain type of purity, and that purity rejected the Jews, it rejected the Gypsies and the Arabs and everyone else, and it led to the Holocaust, which we all know well and good. And then I think my view of things was that at that point in time there was a genuine ability, 1948, a genuine desire, shall we say, globally, and this wasn't just coming from the West, to like not see things like this happening again. So you had, with the kind of decolonization movement, you also had the Genocide Convention happening and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, you know, it was not just, West dominated, yes, but it wasn't just from the West. So this happened in 48, but then two other things happened in 48. One, the establishment of apartheid in South Africa, and two, the creation of the State of Israel. So you had two other things going completely against that trend of rejecting European nationalism. And in those two apartheid models, it's been continued in a very virulent form, okay? So that's my sort of perspective on why I hate European nationalism, is I really feel that this distinguishing of people by the blood and the ethnicity that runs in their veins is fundamentally wrong. That also informs me, because I come from a very, very mixed colonial and anti-colonial background, and I don't know, when I did a blood test, it came from 18 different places, including, you know, from India to the, you know, Mongolia. But it's like I have a difficulty with ascribing a whole mindset to a group of people because of where they're geographically located. That's my problem. I kind of, this word term Gora is kind of, I have a little bit of a problem with it. I get where you're situating with it with, but it's, and I also find it's going to be very difficult for us to deconstruct modernity in one fell swoop. We don't all have the option of going back to the land. I mean, I don't know how, I'm trying to think how I could possibly do that in my life. I mean, it's just, it seems like a sort of, I don't know, is it primitive nativism? Is it, I get that the West is full of like complexities and dysfunctionality. I totally see that. But it also has some things that we could, so this was my last point. We were talking earlier about the Nahda, which happened in Egypt and the Arab world in the sort of early 20th century. But I think it's this idea of not rejecting all of modernity, but taking it on one's own terms. I like that as a resolution.
Is there any other question or yeah, पीछे ले जाए वो जो कैप में जो साहब हाँ
Hi, I just want to ask a personal question, personal from my perspective and that of probably a lot of people in the audience. Professor Naqvi talked about this being a very lonely age. And yes, our social media has connected us so much, but it's made us so much more lonely. So we're watching a genocide take place in the comfort of our homes, in our armchairs, on our not even on your TV screen. You know, it's a very personal experience. I'm a journalist and I used to think that I was a gatekeeper of, you know, what images people would see and what they wouldn't see. But now I have lost that role because everybody has access to Mumtaz Aziza's feed. You know, everybody sees those children dying, you know, those blood-soaked bodies. So how do we deal with this? Do we internalize this? Do we, you know, move on as if nothing's happened? Because our mental health is going down the gutter. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of us here struggle with, you know, how do you celebrate Eid when this is happening? How do you celebrate a happy occasion when this is happening somewhere in the world? So, you know, I'd like to know, is there something we can do or are we doomed to live like this?
I think I should also point out that, you know, this spectacular violence that we witness happening, unfolding, it's not just happening in specific places, it's happening all around, even in our own country. And hence, I think this feeling of this association also makes us very numb about, you know, and as you were saying, Professor Naqvi, like how you are in that sense very anti-national as well. It's not just, the critique is not just of modernity or of Gora as a concept. It's also about other concepts that we think
nationalism is essential to modernity. Nationalism and progress go hand in hand.
Yeah. And so we all embrace that, but when, and so in that intimacy and the intimate, embrace that we have with our own sense of being or our own national identity, we sort of are more comfortable with that, and we don't see any problems with it, and hence, violence elsewhere, looks grotesque, but when it's happening in our own backyard, let's say in Balochistan, it's kind of like a blind spot, right? So while people will be praying in the mosques for the Muslims of Kashmir and Palestine, but not for the Muslims of Balochistan as such, right? So that's
absolutely
that's a strange kind of like behavior. But yeah, if you wanted to respond as well.
Thank you very much for your question, and I'm really. It's a really hard one to answer because I think it's so new for all of us, and all of us are very. It's emotionally distressing on a level that it's hard to put. I mean, you're not alone in feeling alone, but you are really. You're not alone in feeling horrified, but you feel very alone because. I mean, for me, I feel I'm very lucky in a strange way that I live surrounded by people who are Palestinians or otherwise, who are all, actually it's a very multicultural, nationality origin grouping of people who are very politically active on this particular issue, and I have been for like 20 years. So we give each other support, we do things, and that gives us some sort of, I think that it's the feeling of suffering over something and not having any agency to do anything that really is very destructive. So that's why I always think if you can do something, however small, and maybe just, I mean, if it's a small lobbying thing, it's a small objective, but just set it and try and achieve it, and then the next one, and that's it. It's just, it might be a slightly self-interested way of looking at it, but I think it helps to not say it's going on and just despair. I think despair is it's not useful, it's not productive, it's not really the right response at the moment. So anything, just, and don't be rude about other people who are doing things because they're not doing enough. I think this tends to happen as well. Yeah. Try and be collaborative, try and find the best in what other people are doing, because every little effort helps.
So our time is up. Thank you so much, Dr. Dabbagh, Professor Naqvi. I think it was very, very important to have this discussion, to think, when the old world is dying and the new is struggling to be born, and so it required very, very powerful critique of these ideas, which you both have provided, and I think it gives us a lot for us to think about, reflect on our, and think beyond our comfort zone if this world has to be sustainable, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.